Hi everyone, my name is Robin, and I'm going to talk about using authentic materials for teaching L2 reading, vocabulary, and grammar. So first of all, what are authentic materials? Well, according to Gilmore, they are a piece of text written for a real purpose. So what's a real purpose? Well, a real purpose could be explaining something, just telling something, or describing something. What we mean by authentic materials are materials designed not to teach English, so newspapers or books or videos. Okay, so why should you use authentic materials? Well, first of all, they better prepare our students to deal with real English, and they improve their confidence in and out of the classroom. And secondly, they encourage them to search and use authentic materials on their own, which promotes autonomous learning. So basically, if you show your learners that there is a life outside of the textbooks, then they might want to search for reading materials and online, or books and stuff like that. So how do you select your materials? Well, that's the problem. Unlike textbooks, where everything has been pretty much done for you, then you have to do all the work, which means that you have to make sure that there is nothing, political or sexual or violent, that it's good for your learner's level, that the language is appropriate, and that means spelling, grammar, swear words, cursing, and stuff like that. Topics, well, I like to leave it up to my students. I like to give my students the choice. But whether your students are familiar with the topic or not, I don't think it really matters. If they are familiar with the topic, they will have more things to say. If they are not, then maybe it's a good opportunity to create, what we call an information gap between, what they know and what they don't want to know, and what they want to know. Sorry. So, right, you would want to avoid stuff that is culturally loaded, local varieties, strong accents, too many cultural references, idiomatic language, unless you are teaching idioms, high lexical density, so too many content words. You do want to have function words like because, this, then, that, and. So you would want to watch out for all those things. Now, how do you exploit authentic materials? Well, I like to use a three-stage process. So there is a before teaching, during teaching, and after teaching. So here it says reading, but it could be before listening, before watching the video, before reading the article. Well, as I said, you're going to have to do all the work. I think with authentic materials, it's the pre-teaching work is more important, probably more significant than with course books, textbooks. So I would start by setting some goals. What do I want to teach? Do I want to teach um, vocabulary? Do I want to look at expressions and words in the article, or do I want to teach skills? If you want to teach language, then you would want to make a list. I'm saying a short list because you don't want to overload your students with new words. And then if you want to teach skills, then you would want to think about micro skills. So, for example, using topic sentences to guess the meaning of new words. If you're teaching a clear lesson and you're only teaching content, like let's just say you're teaching a lesson about, I don't know, it's a history lesson in English or geography or something else, then that's content, then that's different. And maybe you want to combine all of these things. So what you do want to do is you want to read, let's just say you're using an article, you want to read the text yourself. Then you would want to make a list of words or expressions that you think may create difficulties for your students. You would want to download pictures or maybe prepare some L1 translation. Maybe find pictures and videos related to the topic to make it more interesting. And also because I realized that last year I started using authentic materials, and I started using videos as well. And I realized that, let's just say you're using an article about, say, bugs, and then I don't know, flies, and then you show them a video about flies. You're going to find a lot of words and expressions that are both in the article and the video that you're using. So I think it's a very good way to increase exposure to those language items. So make sure you can find like both, I'd say, an article and maybe a video related to it. I like to use the KWL framework, so I didn't come up with this. You can Google it. K stands for know, W stands for want, L for learn. So before you start teaching, you might want to ask your students, okay, what do you know about the topic? And then after that, what you want to know, do you want to know more? Or you could ask like, what have you learned about the topic? So we're going to look at this in a minute. Okay, so before reading, again, I think the before reading stage is very important, and I have spent entire lessons, like 50 minutes, just on like raising my students' interest and curiosity about the topic, like brainstorming what they know, doing feedback, showing videos, personalizing the topic, asking them, have you seen this before? Like, let's just say if the article is about robots, like, I'd say, where do you see robots? Can you see them in your city? For example, this one here, it's from the website Wonderopolis, and the article is about animatronics. I didn't know what animatronics were until I read the article. They are robots. And so I showed this picture, then, we brainstorm. And what I like about brainstorming before reading is that a lot of the words that are in the article will actually come up during the brainstorm phase. I find that that's because I don't like to pre-teach the words that are in the article. So, for example, you can personalize with open questions. Have you seen animatronics before? And then you could show them maybe a video of the British Museum where there is a T-Rex that's animatronic, and Jurassic Park, of course, and other movies. Now, going back to what I just said about pre-teaching language items, I don't like to pre-teach. I think it just takes away the element of surprise. So I prefer to leave it up to the students. Maybe ask them to read the article at home, and they'll underline or highlight the new words. And again, like if you've done a good job at brainstorming and preparing the reading, then a lot of the words that are in the article will most certainly come up during the brainstorming phase. So again, some people will say, yeah, okay, if you pre-teach, Again, in a lot of courses like CELTA, Delta, they will tell you that, yeah, it will facilitate reading comprehension, but then again, what's the point? If in pre-teaching, if we're using authentic materials. And also because you never know which ones they're going to know. So again, it's good to make a list before you start reading, but I don't think you should be fixated on that list. Well, some people might argue that authentic materials could be too difficult, but again, like if you read recent studies and research on authentic materials, a lot of people will say that you don't want to simplify the materials, but instead you should really simplify the task. So it really depends on what you expect your students to do with the articles or the videos, rather than trying to show them a diluted version of the materials. So before you read, always think about, okay, CCQs, concept checking questions, maybe example sentences that are a bit easier to understand than the sentences in the article. Think about how you're going to drill pronunciation, because I think that, well, you might think that, well, pronunciation drills are too traditional and maybe boring, but I think pronunciation drills can be very useful. It can be very frustrating for students when they learn new words and they don't know how to say them. And imagine like they go home and they've read an article about robots and they can't read it. So I always make a point of reading the article with my students, and then we read the article aloud, and then we do pronunciation drills as well. And I think students like it. So if you're a non-native teacher like me, then you wanna make sure that you are prepared. I don't know. Ask native speakers if you need help with pronunciation. Maybe prepare some reading comprehension questions, but we're going to look at this in a minute. And allow time for note taking. Okay, so again, imagine that your students are using authentic materials. They don't have a course book, but they do need to take something away from your lesson. And I think that note taking should account for a very significant part of using authentic materials in language teaching. So I was talking about comprehension questions, and I use this book, The Teaching of Science in Primary School, and this is really awesome book to write your own questions. It basically shows how science teachers in, I think, maybe the US or Canada can help their students show that they understand maybe very complex concepts like physics or chemistry. And so I used this book to write my own comprehension questions to make sure that my learners can develop like cognitive skills like interpreting, making predictions, categorizing, comparing, and so on. And there's a lot more. So yeah, definitely check out that book if you're using authentic materials and if you want to help your students develop their answers, not just give you yes and no answers, and really give you longer answers. And there's a whole framework in this. For example, this is a video called I Didn't Know That from National Geographic, and it's about quicksands. And I created my own worksheet. I'm going to show you in a minute.
That can no longer support as much weight. So when you stand on it, you start to sink. I want to find out if it's actually possible to get out of quicksand. And to do that, I'm going to have to get in it. But I'm not going anywhere around here without the help of the professionals.
So I use this video because in the course book, yes, I also use course books, but in the course book there was a unit about emergency services, which was really a unit about must and mustn't. Okay, so modals: should, shouldn't, must, mustn't. And I thought the topic was very good, was very interesting. Emergency services, firefighters, and police officers and coast guards. So I found this video, and then I'm like, okay, kind of want to do something with this. And because some of the words that, I mean, there were words and expressions in the video that also came up in the course book, which is why I believe that when you make sure that the topic is that your lesson is always about the topic, the same topic, then you're going to realize that a lot of the same words come up. So again, like I wrote my own worksheet using the science book that I was talking about, and I thought about, okay, how am I going to avoid yes and no answers from my students? How am I going to have them like give me longer answers? How am I going to make sure that they listen to the video, they observe, and this is on the right. This is what one of my students, who's like 9 years old, and this is what she wrote, and she was clearly paying attention. And the way I use the worksheet is that I went over the questions with my students, make sure they understand the questions, and then I paused the video at key points, and I must have shown the video like twice, which is not too many, but which was enough to get a lot of language keywords like quicksands, wiggle, suit, sinking. So we got a lot of language out of that video. Sorry about that. Okay, so videos related to the topic, the videos don't have to be your main source of language. I showed this. It's a video. It's a T-Rex in the British Museum. It's an animatronic dinosaur, and just to make it a bit more interesting. Okay. Now, how do you use authentic materials to teach, for example, like reading skills, like topic sentence? Topic sentences can be, I don't know, reading, also writing. Like if you're writing in English, I think you need to know what a topic sentence is. And so I taught that using this article from Wonderopolis about animatronics, and then we looked at this one. Sorry about that. Here, for example, some of my students didn't know the meaning of theme parks, so I said, okay, just keep reading because this sentence is only giving you the main idea. So see if you can relate this information here, theme parks, to the rest of the paragraph. And so they saw Disneyland and Universal Studios and rides, Splash Mountain, and then one of my students, he came up with the word roller coaster, and I'm like, okay, yes. Then they sort of like start getting the idea of what a theme park is, and then you can always expand. For example, like by asking them, like, are there any theme parks in your city? What are the difference between theme parks and regular parks like Hyde Park where you walk your dog? You can also use translation if you want to check that they understand. So this just shows you how using authentic materials it does not preclude teaching language. You could have a whole lesson just like teaching new words. And this is what's been called like focus and form, which is real-time and online teaching of vocabulary or grammar points. Now, real-time means online. Sorry, I should really this. Okay, the online does not mean like on the internet. Online means real-time, and this is in contrast with the PPP approach, which will tell you, okay, well, today, students are going to learn the present simple, and then you end up with a lesson about the present simple, which is, as most of you probably know, super boring and maybe a little ineffective. But I like to do this like real time, online. Again, CCQ here. If you don't want to end up asking questions like, do you understand? Or what does that mean? You want to avoid this kind of question. So instead of, if you ask are there theme parks in your city, and then if they say, yeah, there's one where you can go on this roller coaster, and then they get it. Reading can be done individually in class, can be done in groups, can be done as homework. Now, I cannot stress enough the need to make it interactive. So I was using this book, the Mr. and Mrs. I don't know if you're familiar with these. Mr. Mean, Mr. Worry, Mrs. Scatterbrain. So I scanned the pages, I scanned the entire book and put it on a PPT and then PowerPoint, and then so here, so she's sick here, Little Miss Sunshine. She's got a cold, and then give her some advice, like, okay, well, she should take medicine, she should stay home, she should have some chicken soup, she shouldn't go out, she shouldn't see her friends. So stop reading and ask questions, and then give them 4 or 5 minutes to come up with ideas. You can do it orally with younger learners, or with the older ones. You can ask them to write something. You could also teach like lexical fields. So you can have a title. Again, like titles are very good for note taking, because they will really help your learners like locate what they've learned before. So in a few lessons, they're gonna forget what they've learned, but then they have their notebook. They can go back. They see the title. Some of my students came up with the Little Miss Sunshine as a title next to the date, and then they can really find the information quickly when they need it. And then what I mean by lexical fields is that, for example, if you look at this, it's all about sickness. So sniffle, snuffle, sneeze, have a cold, catch a cold. So there's research that showed that learning like lexical fields is a lot more. It's easier to remember than learning, say, opposites or maybe days of the week. So it's a little different from the way language is organized in textbooks, I think. Again, KWL or KLW, what have you learned? What else do you want to know? Well, I like to assign post-reading tasks. For example, like writing a summary, what have you learned? And then you can teach paraphrasing skills. Instead of asking true and false questions. So again, like paraphrasing skills, that can be taught at middle school or even late primary school level. Basically, you could tell your students that they have to write a summary for you, and then they're not allowed to use any of the words in the article. Or you could ask them to write an opinion paper using the new expressions that they've learned during the lesson and the new words that the notes that they took. So there's a lot of reading tasks that you could do. If going back to the KWL framework, what else do you want to know? You could ask them to go home and Google more information about the topic and then come back and tell you what they've learned. Maybe they could come up with some questions, things they want to know, and research, and do some research. For example, here, this article was great. It was about cinemas and do we still need movie theaters now that there is a pandemic and a lot of people don't go to the cinema anymore because of the coronavirus. So it was a very relevant, very timely topic. And then we talked about the COVID-19 and some students say, well, they would rather stay at home. Some others say, well, they like to go to the cinema because they like to eat popcorn with their friends and stuff like that. And then this article had four opinion um, articles written by maybe real readers of Time for Kids. I don't know if it's real, but it looks real anyway for my learners. And so I read this with my students. We focused on discourse markers like that, then contractions like there is. So again, there's a lot of material for like language to teach language. And then I asked them to write their own like opinion article. Oh, sorry. So yeah, one of my students that he wrote that, do we still need cinemas, or based on that lesson about movie theaters. This was written by a younger student, based on the Little Miss Sunshine story. And yeah, she wrote that. I gave her some feedback, and then she wrote it again, correcting the mistakes. So this was more of a writing exercise. And again, like I got like 4 or 5 kids to do this, and yeah, I think again, this is how you could really move on to like some other activities. Um, you could also have like class discussions. Do you like going to the cinema, or do you like to use online streaming services like Netflix? Pros and cons, and then if you have like 10 students, you could split them into groups, stuff like that. So there's a lot of activities that you could do based on authentic materials. So getting started, I would say read Tomlinson. He talks a lot about adapting course books because that's where I started. I first started out adapting course books and using the PPP approach. That I don't like the PPP approach, but I think it's a good place to start because of the structure. And then again, like you would want to get familiar with focus on form and focus on forms approaches. That's long in the 1990s. He was one of the first to write about this. I think he came up with FOF and FOFS. And then there's a lot of research that's been done about the focusing on form and FO and the two different approaches. Note taking, always again like focus on note taking if you're using authentic materials. I would read about authenticity, materials, and tasks. Again, authenticity is not just about the materials, but also about the tasks. A true and false task is not authentic because, well, that's not exactly what people do in real life. You only find true and false tasks in exams and yeah, maybe at the customs at the airport or something. I don't know. Maybe not. And but summarizing and paraphrasing are, I think, authentic tasks. Um, I'd read a lot about clear. I read a lot about science teaching and how to develop my students' cognitive skills. So using open questions rather than one-way interaction where you end up asking all the questions in a classroom. Classroom interaction, open questions, and display questions. There are questions you ask to check that your students know check language. But I like to ask real open questions, even though I might not I might not know the answer to those questions. So I think, yeah, that's about it for this presentation about authentic materials. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was useful to you. Maybe you can go back and use some of that stuff. Um, there's going to be, I think, a Q&A now, and you can ask me some questions. And I'm happy to give sources for like where I find articles, videos, and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't stay online maybe, and I'll answer your questions. Thank you.